Hello there, I'm Jason Butler, and thanks for joining me on another episode of my self-build series. In this episode, I just want to explain to you how I arrived at deciding on the construction method of the building. Because when you're building a house, you've got two essential construction methods. You've got the traditional approach, which is brick and block, or you've got the timber framed approach, which is where you have the house built as a timber frame, and then you have big insulation, very solid insulation panels used as the wall. And you can skim up the side with bricks, but essentially the whole structure of the building is made out of insulation around the wooden frame. Because in Scandinavia, timber framed and insulated houses are the norm, whereas in the UK it tends to be brick and block, certainly for residential anyway. When you're thinking about going through the process, I had to look at the pros and the cons. Now, when I got the initial assessment of the price, there really didn't seem to be a huge amount in it. It was roughly, I think, everything all in was about £165,000. And this is for 1,000 square foot, single story bungalow type property. So if it wasn't really about price, what was it that made me decide to go the route I did? Insulation is a very important thing, and efficiency, fuel efficiency, is very important to me. But it's actually easier to achieve higher insulation from what my research shows with a property with very high insulated panels. And that's particularly important for me because I'm going to be using air source heating for the heating and the hot water in the property. And that's because we don't have gas here, and I don't want to put an oil tank in because that's sort of, last century. So you need very, very high insulation values, and you need what's called a very good airtight function on the property, which means that you want to basically minimise the amount of air loss out of the property. And that was a tick in the box for timber framed and highly insulated property for the heating source, so that was one tick. Another benefit for the timber framed over the traditional construction for me was the fact that I wasn't going to have huge numbers of trades on site to actually get the structure up, because when you do a traditional construction, you've got several wet trades and you are at the mercy of the weather, and if you've got bad weather it holds you back, etc. Because the frame and all of the panels are manufactured in a factory, and it sounds a bit weird, I know, but it's manufactured to a very high level and then it is brought onto site. It actually goes up much quicker compared to a traditional construction, and you're much less at the mercy of the weather. We're expecting the on-site build to take about 3 to 4 weeks tops, and that's including full weather tight, all the windows, doors, all the roof, everything done. And that's particularly important to me because I'm planning this, I'm talking to you now at the end of May 2020, and we are just coming out of the strong lockdown from the coronavirus. And I'm a bit concerned that if we get a second wave of the coronavirus situation, and that affects the ability for me to get tradesmen on site because of sickness, or they're isolating or whatever in late summer, that might well slow my build down. Whereas if it's being manufactured in a factory where they can control the social distancing, etc., I've got much more chance of them being able to turn up and put the building up in one go. The third thing was that I wanted to minimise my risk. Now, the company I'm buying the frame and all the insulation and who is actually coming to put it up for me is called Potton Homes. And they're owned by an enormous company called Kingspan, which actually is a big manufacturer of insulation and sewage units and what have you. And more importantly, they've got a great technical unit and project planning unit that assists sort of novice first-time house builders like me, just sort of really been useful. Right at the beginning, they've sort of suggested things to me, they've pointed things out, I've asked their opinion on things, and because they've been doing this for 50 years, they kind of know all the pitfalls. So it's been really supporting for me in a way that I don't think I would have with just having a builder. And that's really quite important. So that's a tick in the box. And another benefit for me is I can absolutely be sure of the quality of the build, because I've looked at Potton Homes, show homes, and where they put them up elsewhere. Because they're manufacturing most of the building in a factory, it's a controlled environment. The chances of there being variations in quality are very minimal. Obviously there will be site-specific issues, but they do come along and check the slab and the final manufacturer, come a couple of weeks before, and then only then, once they sign the slab off and the foundations do, they then go about building all your units, and then they deliver it all and then install it. So that gave me a great deal of comfort. The final thing was, I just think that a wooden framed insulated house will suit this build better than traditional block, because The planning, because my own house in which this self-build is being built next to, my house is grade 2 listed, and so therefore we had certain restrictions on what we could and couldn't do with this building, and we have to clad it in wood, so it looks like a barn type building. And so if you're going to clad a building in wood, why would you bother having blocks behind it? It just doesn't seem to make sense. So it's also in true keeping with if it was a barn style building, because as you know, we're taking this building down behind us here. So it's kind of a little bit more true to the original structure that's there. That just feels right to me from an emotional and a philosophical level. But there are some downsides to having timber framed and insulated panel type houses. I mean, there are plenty of mortgage lenders who will lend against a house like this, but there are less mortgage lenders. So if you come to sell the property or you need to mortgage it to get some capital out, you've got less opportunity to find, there's less mortgage lending that's possible. Although that is changing by the sort of, every year. And the key thing is that you must make sure that you have a house warranty, guarantee policy for 10 years. You can only get that if certain standards are met. And that's why I'm using Potton with their specification. The other thing, of course, is that also it means you've got to actually employ a builder to do your groundwork and trades to do the finishing off. So that's the outside cladding and the inside fitting out of the kitchens and plumbing. But I've found a great builder who you'll meet in future episodes called Dan, who is actually going to help me manage all of that stuff and provide those trades. Just one other thing I should just mention also about foundations. Now, traditionally, you have a foundation built and you then build up the concrete slab to the edge of the thing. Well, I'm going for what's called block and beam, and I'll show you that in a future episode. This is where you build the edges of the foundations to hold the property, to hold the structure. What you do is you essentially have long concrete sort of rails, and then you put blocks in between them so that the actual the floor of the building is held above the ground level. But it's just the more efficient way of doing things, and the floor just doesn't move. You never get any cracking, and it's a real solid situation, and you just cover it with a bit of slurry to fill in the gaps. So watch out for that one in a future episode. And just one other thing I should just mention about using someone like Potton is that they also provide the foundation design to their specification that meets their requirements to receive the frame. So by using a really, really good, reputable and large and well-established house manufacturer, they're helping make sure that the foundations, the slab, the specification, the building regs, everything meets the requirements so that when they turn up on site to install that house, it should, fingers crossed, should go pretty smoothly.